loved ones to pay their respects and say their final goodbyes. The event was a blend of sorrow and reflection, with heartfelt tributes pouring in from those who knew them best.
You know, there are some stories that stay with you. Stories that you hear, and you just can't shake them off, no matter how much time passes. This is one of those stories. And I want to tell it to you the way it deserves to be told, with care, with honesty, and with the deep respect that the people involved deserve. It was a cold December morning in Phoenix, Arizona. The kind of morning where the sky is still gray, and most people are just getting their day started, making coffee, getting their kids ready for school, living their normal lives. But on this particular morning, December 11th, 2023, something happened that would leave an entire community shattered. Just after 10 in the morning, police officers were called to a quiet apartment complex on the west side of the city, a place called Sunrise Terrace Apartments, near the intersection of Desert Ridge Road and Cactus Avenue. Neighbors had made frantic calls to 911. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene that no one, no officer, no first responder, no human being should ever have to walk into. Inside one of the apartment units, they found multiple people who had been shot. The officers immediately called for medical support and began doing everything they could to help. But for 3 of those people, there was nothing left to do. 3 lives had already been taken. A woman, a teenager, a little child, all gone. A 4th person, a young child, was still alive, but barely. Emergency workers rushed that child to the hospital in critical condition, fighting for their life. And the person responsible for what happened? He was also found dead at the scene, having turned the gun on himself after taking the lives of those he was supposed to love and protect. In the hours that followed, investigators began piecing together what had happened. And as the details came out one by one, the community's heartbreak turned into something else: anger, confusion, and a devastating question that would echo for months to come. How did it come to this? And could it have been stopped? Today, I want to walk you through this story from beginning to end. Because the victims in this case deserve more than a headline. They deserve for their story to be told and for the world to understand what happened and why it matters so deeply. Before we go any further, I want to stop and take a moment to talk about the people who lost their lives that morning. Because it's so easy, in cases like this, for names to become just names, numbers in a report, facts in a news story. But these were real people. They had real lives, real smiles, real dreams. The woman's name was Sandra Mitchell. She was 34 years old. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother, a woman who poured everything she had into her family. At 34, she still had so much life ahead of her. So much she hadn't done yet. So much she deserved to see. And in one violet morning, all of that was taken from her. Then there was Kayla Brooks. Kayla was 14 years old. 14. Think about that for a moment. She was just a teenager. At that age where the world is still opening up, where you're figuring out who you are, what you love, what kind of person you want to become. She never got the chance to find out. Her life was cut short in the most brutal, senseless way imaginable. And then there was the littlest one. 6-year-old Zoe Mitchell. 6 years old. She was a child who had barely even had time to learn how big and beautiful the world was. 6 years is not enough time. It is nowhere near enough time. And yet, that was all she was given. All 3 of them, Sandra, Kayla, and little Zoe, were killed by the same man. A man named Marcus Allen, who was 42 years old, and who had been living in that same apartment with them. Marcus turned the gun on himself after taking their lives, and so he too was found dead when police arrived. A 4th child was also in that apartment. We don't know their name. Investigators chose not to release it to protect the child's privacy. But this little one survived. Barely. They were rushed to the hospital in critical condition, and that survival, fragile as it was, became a small, painful thread of hope in an otherwise unbearable story. When the coroner completed the official reports, the details were confirmed. Sandra, Kayla, and Zoe all died from gunshot wounds to the head. Their deaths were ruled homicides. Marcus died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His death was ruled a suicide. And so that was the scene that Phoenix woke up to on that cold December morning. 3 innocent lives, ended by one man's violence. And as the city tried to make sense of the tragedy, people started asking questions about Marcus Allen, about his past, and about a system that may have failed to keep these victims safe. Here is where the story takes a turn that makes the grief even harder to carry. Because as investigators and journalists began looking into Marcus Allen's background, what they found was disturbing, and it raised questions that went far beyond this one tragedy. Let's go back to October 2022. More than a year before that December morning. That's when Marcus Allen was first arrested. And the charges against him were serious. Deeply serious. He was charged with 9 separate felony counts.
9.
These included multiple counts of sexual misconduct with children under the age of 14, additional counts involving a child under 16, and even a charge of first-degree kidnapping of a minor. According to court documents, the alleged offenses had been going on for years, stretching all the way back to 2013 and continuing through 2022. That's nearly a decade of alleged abuse against children. When he was arrested, a judge initially set his bail at $100,000. That was the number that was supposed to keep the community safe, a figure that reflected the seriousness of the charges against him. But then, just 2 months later, in December 2022, something happened. His defense attorneys went back to court and argued for a reduction. And the judge agreed. The bail was cut from $100,000 all the way down to $10,000. $10,000. And with that, Marcus Allen walked out of jail. He posted bond and went home. Now, to be fair, this wasn't done carelessly or without rules. The court attached conditions to his release.
He was placed on house arrest.
He was fitted with an ankle monitor so his movements could be tracked. And there was a court order, a legal requirement, that he have absolutely no contact with any child under the age of 18. But here's the thing. Those conditions, the ankle monitor, the house arrest, the no-contact order, they are only as strong as the ability to enforce them. And for a man accused of the things Marcus Allen was accused of, the question has to be asked, was electronic monitoring really enough? The prosecutors thought the answer was no. Officials from the local district attorney's office were openly opposed to the bail reduction. They argued that the severity of the charges justified keeping Marcus Allen behind bars. They believed he was a danger, and they said so. But the judge's hands were tied, at least partially, by a legal directive that had come down years earlier. The state courts had ruled that judges must use the least restrictive means necessary to ensure a defendant shows up for their court date. In other words, if the court can achieve that goal without putting someone in jail before they're convicted, it must try to do so. It's a rule meant to protect people who haven't yet been found guilty from being punished simply because they can't afford to pay their way out. The intent behind that rule is not cruel. It's actually meant to be fair. The justice system is supposed to assume innocence until guilt is proven. But when the person accused is someone like Marcus Allen, charged with harming children over the span of nearly 10 years, the tension between those principles becomes painful. And in this case, that tension would have devastating consequences. By late 2023, Marcus Allen's criminal trial still hadn't happened. A jury trial date had been set for April 2024. He was still under house arrest, still wearing his ankle monitor, still waiting. And Sandra, Kayla, and little Zoe were still in that apartment, within reach of a man the system had chosen not to lock away. After the news broke and the names of the victims were released to the public, the Phoenix community didn't stay silent. People were heartbroken. They were angry. And they were asking hard questions out loud, the kind of questions that don't have easy answers but need to be asked anyway. A local restaurant owner near the Sunrise Terrace neighborhood heard about the family and immediately decided to do something. He organized a fundraiser. opening his doors, selling food, and donating every single dollar he made that day to Sandra's surviving family members to help cover the cost of 3 funerals, 3 people to bury, 3 sets of final expenses for a family that was already broken open by grief. Community members showed up. They came to support, to grieve together, to honor Sandra, Kayla, and little Zoe. Local news covered the event, but what struck people most wasn't the cameras or the coverage. It was the feeling in the room. The quiet, heavy weight of shared loss. Friends and relatives of the victims also began speaking out publicly. And what they said was raw and honest. They were angry that Marcus Allen had been allowed to come home. They were angry that a man facing 9 felony counts, including crimes against children, had been released with nothing but an ankle bracelet and a piece of paper telling him to stay away from kids. They felt that the system had looked at those charges, looked at those children, and still chosen to let him walk. One family member reportedly said that they had been scared, that they had worried, that they had seen the warning signs and hoped the courts would intervene before something terrible happened. But the terrible thing happened anyway. The surviving child, the 4th person found in that apartment, was still fighting for their life in the hospital as all of this unfolded. The community held its breath, hoping and praying for that child's recovery. Fundraising efforts extended to cover that child's needs as well, as family members rallied around the one tiny, fragile reminder that not everything had been taken. In the days following the tragedy, the city grappled with what it had just experienced. Pastors spoke about it from their pulpits. Community leaders held meetings. Social media was flooded with tributes to Sandra, to Kayla, to Zoe, photos of their faces, words about what they meant to the people who loved them. But running underneath all of that grief was something sharp and persistent, the question of accountability. Not just accountability for Marcus Allen, who was dead and beyond the reach of justice, but accountability for a system that had made choices. Choices about bail. Choices about who is dangerous and who is not. Choices about what it means to keep people safe. Those questions didn't have quick answers. They still don't. But they were real, and they were urgent, and the people of Phoenix made sure they weren't swept under the rug. So here we are, at the end of a story that I wish didn't exist. A story about a woman who deserved to live. About a teenage girl who deserved to grow up. About a 6-year-old child who deserved a lifetime of ordinary days. About a child who survived and will carry the weight of that mourning for the rest of their life. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with a story like this? The conversations that followed the deaths of Sandra, Kayla, and little Zoe were not comfortable ones. They touched on some of the most difficult tensions in our criminal justice system, tensions that don't resolve easily and that affect real people's lives every single day. On one side, there is a principle that matters deeply, the idea that a person is innocent until proven guilty. That you don't punish someone before they've been convicted. That people who are poor shouldn't sit in jail for months or a year simply because they can't afford bail, while wealthier defendants with the same charges go home. These are legitimate concerns. They represent real injustices that have hurt real communities. But on the other side, there is an equally real concern that when someone is charged with serious crimes, especially crimes against children, releasing them back into the community carries risk. Risk to the people around them. Risk to those who may not even know they're in danger. Risk that, in the case of Marcus Allen and the people he killed, became a devastating reality. How do we hold both of those truths at the same time? How do we build a system that is fair to defendants while also protecting the people who are most vulnerable? How do we ensure that ankle monitors and no-contact orders are more than just paperwork, that they actually keep people safe? There are no simple answers. But the story of Sandra Mitchell, Kayla Brooks, and Zoe Mitchell demands that we keep asking. It demands that we look hard at how risk is assessed when violent or sexual offenses are involved. It demands that we examine how courts make decisions, how bail is set, how electronic monitoring works, and whether it is enough. Most of all, this story demands that we remember them, not just as victims, not just as names in a report or faces in a news segment, but as real people who mattered. Sandra, who loved her children. Kayla, who was just beginning to discover who she was. Zoe, who was only 6 years old and had done absolutely nothing to deserve what happened to her. Their story is a tragedy, but it is also a call. A call to pay attention, to ask hard questions, to demand better from the systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable among us. If you're watching this, I want you to carry their names with you. Sandra,
Kayla, Zoe,
and the little one who survived, who is out there somewhere, healing, trying to find a way forward through unimaginable pain. We owe it to all of them to make sure this story is not forgotten. And we owe it to each other to keep having the hard conversations it demands. Thank you for watching. Please share this if it moved you. And if you know someone who needs to hear the story, send it to them. Because awareness is the first step. And the first step matters. Follow for more.